one of my favorite pictures in the book, so I can't wait to see it, even though I have seen it, but
Right.
that's a
I just
that's a
wish
fantastic
they would
story.
make a movie so I could see her actually charge up the hill like that.
I wonder if there is in
There is in
Hungary.
Germany. You can see a film of her
Ooh.
do that. Yes. They had a
Now I have
miniseries on her. I watched it.
Oh, now I'm going to write that down. I like watching foreign movies. Oh, that's fantastic. Oh, good. I can't wait to see that. Wonder if they have a clip on YouTube. Now I'm going to have to watch that
They
when I go
do.
home.
They do.
Oh, wonderful. So hello again to everybody. Just give us one more minute. We're just letting everybody file in and then we'll get started. So if you need to go and grab a cup of coffee or a drink of water, you still have a few minutes.
I'll talk slow, so.
It's okay. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. We have a good group in here. So hello to everybody at the Hudson Library. Just a quick little announcement, then we can go ahead and start things. So welcome, I'm Derek. I'm one of the reference librarians here. A couple little things. You may be interested in some other programs we're going to be having via Zoom. Wednesday, January 19th, we have Brad Taylor at 7 p.m. He's going to be talking about his newest book, End of Days, a Pike Logan novel. Monday, January 31st, at the end of the month, we have at 7 p.m. Diane Chamberlain. She's going to talk about her latest book, The Last House on the Street. So if you're interested in any of those programming, go to hudsonlibrary.org to sign up. So we'd like to thank also the Learned Owl for providing copies of this book here, In the Shadow of the Empress. And that'll be available in the bottom of the screen. So if you want to purchase that, you can go ahead and purchase it from the Learned Owl, our local bookseller. And by the way, at the very end of our presentation, we'll have time for questions. So there's a little Q&A thing down there. So don't be shy, ask some questions. And with that, we'll introduce the author. So tonight we have Nancy Goldstone, and she'll be talking about Shadow of the Empress here, her newest book about Maria Theresa. So the author graduated with honors in history from Cornell University and received her MA in International Affairs from Columbia University. She's written and reviewed for a number of publications, including the New York Times, Washington Post, Boston Globe Magazine, and the Miami Herald. She's written numerous books, such as The Daughters of the Winter Queen, Rival Queens, The Maid and the Queen, The Lady Queen, and Four Queens. Hopefully I got all those right there. And she's coming to us live from Del Mar, California. So let's hear it for Nancy Goldstone, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. That was a lovely introduction. And thank you all for being there. And I'm thrilled to be here, even virtually, to welcome you to the 18th century. I'm sure you can, I hope you can all see this beautiful image. Isn't it lovely? And what's even better about it is you're looking at something that actually happened. They didn't have photography in the 18th century. So what they did when they wanted to remember an event was they would have the court painter, who in this case was an artist by the name of Martin van Muytens, and he would come when they had the event, and he'd take lots and lots and lots of sketches, and then he would go back to his workshop and create these huge crowd paintings that you could then put up on the wall to remember it. And since the idea was to remember it, they tried to get as close to accuracy as they tried to make it look as much as it really had happened. So you really have here is a little window into the past. And what you're looking at is what they called a carousel, which was a riding competition. There were horse races, and in this case, they also had chariot races in emulation of the Romans, like in Ben-Hur. And this one was held in Vienna on January 2nd, 1743, at the Imperial Riding School, which was pretty close to the Hofburg Palace. So this is really from 1743, this is what it looked like. And what's really, so you can see they would have the horse races in the arena down there on the racetrack, and then the spectators would be tiered up from the boxes above. But what's really interesting about this particular carousel was, if you look closely, you'll see that all the competitors, the people who are riding on the horses or in the chariots, they're all women. That was really unusual for the period. And the reason for it was, so only women were competing in this, it was called the Ladies Carousel. And the reason that they had it this way was that for the very first time, a woman was running the empire. And it was this woman right here. This is Maria Theresa. If you see on the book, you've got this picture of her. It's a very famous on the cover of the book. It's when she's older. It's because they wanted her to be immediately recognizable because it was a biography of Maria Theresa. But in this case, but this is the one portrait that I really like because she's younger here. You can see how pretty she was. She was really very pretty, but also I love this pose. I love look at the dignity she has, the clear-eyed vision. You're looking at one of the most important and inspiring women rulers ever in history. But before I talk about her, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and what I do so that you'll understand what I was trying to do and why I wrote about Maria Theresa. I'm the person in history who writes about, I'm the person who writes about all the most important women in history who nobody has ever heard of. That's what I do. And it all started some years back when I wrote this book. It was called Four Queens, about a family of 4 13th century sisters, the daughters of the Count of Provence, who all became queens. Queen of France, Queen of England, Queen of Germany, and Queen of Sicily. Very cool. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about one of the women in this book. The eldest sister, Marguerite of Provence, who was married to Louis IX, King of France in the 13th century. So 13th century, we're in the 1200s here. That's how far back I went. So you should know that Louis IX is one of the most revered kings in all of French history. They love Louis IX in France. He was even sainted. Well, during his reign, Louis decides to go on crusade. So he gets his big French army together and he sails down to Egypt. And there has, I would say, one of the top 3 military disasters in all of French history. It was terrible. It was terrible. Thousands of Frenchmen dead in the desert, and Louis himself captured and held for a crippling ransom. Trust me, this made Waterloo look like a small setback. Less well known is that his wife, Marguerite, actually accompanied him on this expedition. And when he had his massive defeat in the desert, it was up to her to salvage what was left of the operation. She had to hold a port city all on her own. You got to have a port, no ships. No ships, you are never getting out. Also, no food or supplies can come in. She had to negotiate his ransom with his captors. She had to send to France for the money, where his mother, who was ruling as regent while he was away, that poor woman had to get the money together twice because the first time she sent it, it sank. Finally, the money comes down to Marguerite's port, but she still has to successfully make the transfer. Not an easy thing to do. They could easily have kept the king and the cash, but no, she makes the transfer, she gets him out, and he won't go back. He wants to try again. So she stayed with him for the next several years, during which time she had 3 children, and she lugged those kids, 3 children under the age of 5, all over the desert after him, as this kind of visible reminder of his earthly responsibilities, until he finally gave in and agreed to go back to France so that he could become the great king of French legend. And he's the saint. And that's just one story in this book. All these women were fabulous. So after I finished this book, I said to myself, gee, I wonder if there are any other important women in history who nobody has ever heard of. So I looked into the next century, the 14th century, and sure enough, I came up with this woman right here, Joanna I, 14th century queen of Naples, Jerusalem, and Sicily, and Countess of Provence, She was actually the great-great-granddaughter of the youngest of one of my 4 queens. And this woman, Joanna I, she was amazing. I'm just going to tell you really, really quickly a little bit about her so you understand. So Joanna is married at the age of 7 to her 6-year-old Hungarian cousin, Prince Andrew. When she's about 19, Andrew, who I'm afraid grew up to be kind of obnoxious, is murdered in a mysterious conspiracy by unknown assailants. And his family, the Hungarians, use this as a pretext to invade Naples, claiming that Joanna is responsible for the assassination. So Joanna has to go flee her kingdom and go stand trial for her life in front of the Pope at Avignon for the crime of murdering Andrew. There, she defends herself in Latin, which is the only language that the papal court will recognize, wins a complete acquittal. You know how many women in history have been said to do that? You are looking at her, this woman right here, that's the only one. Wins a complete acquittal, turns the Pope from an enemy into an ally, raises an army, and goes back and gets her kingdom. I just love that about her. And she rules for a further 30 years, doing a great job. She brought that kingdom back from the plague. She expanded their borders. And we all know what coming back from the plague looks like now. She supported the arts. She supported women doctors. And she was a terrific diplomat. In fact, Joanna is the reason that the papacy is no longer in Avignon. It was she who convinced the Pope and the cardinals to come back to Italy. It was her ships that brought them. It was under her protection that they made the trip and stayed in Italy. And that is the reason that when you go to Avignon, the papal tower there is a museum and the Pope is in Rome, just because of her. So after I finished that book, I said, okay, this is clearly something. And what I decided to do was to look in every century for the most important women who no one had ever heard of and look at their stories and bring those stories to life. And so that is what I've done. I went from the 13th and the 14th centuries to the 15th century. I did a French court. The 16th century, I did the French court. The 17th century, I just did was, I did Mary Queen of Scots' granddaughter, Elizabeth Stuart and her 4 daughters. That was my book, Daughters of the Winter Queen. And now I've come to Maria Theresa in the 18th century. And I've known that I wanted to do Maria Theresa for a very long time. And the reason for that was that as good as those other stories were that I just told you, hers is better. Hers is one of the best stories I have ever heard. So, let's finally, now that we're here, let's talk about Maria Theresa. So this is what happened with her. She's 23 years old, untrained, completely untrained, untested, pregnant, when her father suddenly dies. And because there are no male heirs, she succeeds to all of his property, which includes the thrones of Austria, Hungary, and Bohemia, and the overlordship of Brussels, Flanders, Germany, and a large part of Italy. She's the only woman ever to inherit this vast Habsburg Empire in her own right. Now, this being the 18th century, a time when they were very opportunistic, the immediate reaction of the European powers that surrounded the other kingdoms that surrounded her, who are of course all run by men, was to very bravely band together and attack her all at once from every direction at the same time, on the grounds that as a woman, she would be too weak to rule or to protect her property. And they could just waltz in there and divvy up her lands and subjects amongst themselves as easily as that. And oh, did I mention, I forgot to mention that her father, Maria Theresa's father, was not the most effective emperor. And when he left her all this property and all these subjects and all of these thrones, he also left her a completely ruined army and no money in the treasury. So she starts her reign with nothing but her brains and her spirit, basically, and attacked on all sides by powers that are much more, that have much better armies and much more money and just simply more power than she does. It was one of the worst, it was one of the most difficult openings to a reign that I have ever seen. And the story of how she turned the tables on them and how she ended up walloping them back is one of the best. It's just one of the best and most inspiring moments for a woman that I think that you can ever read about. As it begins to dawn on the other powers that this isn't going to be all that easy, and oh yes, maybe they're going to get themselves wiped out also. That is just a great story. Her number one antagonist in this whole war, and in the wars that come, actually, also is Frederick the Great. And Frederick the Great is a character that all historians love because he is so deliciously, openly amoral. He never met a double or triple cross that he didn't love. And he does everything. He does just the worst behavior, and he has the worst behavior, and he does it all with a great one-liner at the end. So he's really very amusing to read about also. But she succeeds, so she fends off all that attack, keeps her stuff, and goes on to reign for 40 years. And she does it. She also does like Joanna the First in Naples. She does a great job. She reads every paper that crosses her desk. She chairs her own council. She makes every decision herself. And she did it all while having 16 children in 20 years. And we think we invented multitasking. I mean, she would literally work up to the moment of when the labor started, then have the baby and be back at her desk a couple hours later. She was just incredible. So this is her whole family. Actually, it's not the whole family. Two of the kids are missing. This portrait was painted before she even she finished having the children. But she was also I want to go back to what was so wonderful about her. Now, she wasn't, I want to tell you, first of all, she wasn't a perfect ruler by any means. She had one really big flaw, and that was a big fault, and that was that she was intolerant of religion. She was a very pious Catholic, and she believed that anyone who wasn't Catholic was a heretic. You couldn't be a Protestant, you couldn't work in her government. Only you had to convert to Catholicism. Protestants were basically second-class citizens. Vienna and Austria were kind of the mirror image of England at this time. In England, it was Protestant, it was Church of England. You couldn't hold a position in government unless you were a Protestant. The Catholics were the second-class citizens. In Austria, Vienna, it was the Protestants who were the second-class citizens. And she was also terrible about Jewish people. She tried to kick them out, or when she was convinced not to do that by her advisors, then she levied fines on them. But one thing she did not do, she never rounded anybody up and killed them or did anything like that. That was a line that she never crossed. But she was not good about religion. And so everything that you do, everything that she did do, you have to temper through that this was really a major fault. And you have to decide for yourself what kind of a ruler she was. But on the side of the things that she did do, she was the first one to tax the aristocracy in Austria and in her lands. And she did it because she didn't think it was fair that the peasantry had to have all the burden of paying the taxes. And there was a huge if you think, you know how we are when the people try to raise taxes on us today. If they had never had any taxes raised at all, they had never had any taxes at all for thousands of years, the aristocracy. And in fact, if France had done it when she did it, then there wouldn't have been needed to have a revolution. But she did. So she did that. She reformed the health system. Smallpox was a terrible plague back then, and it took her a while, but she did eventually go for inoculation, it was actually much more dangerous back then because they had to use the live, they hadn't gotten to the cowpox yet. They used live smallpox. So you could actually get the disease from it, but in general, it worked. And when she found that it worked, she paid for poor people to have it. And she improved the hospital. She improved the education. She really improved the army. She did everything she could to protect and defend her subjects and to improve their lives. And when she died, she was trying to get Hungary was very resistant to having things done. She was trying to get the serfs freed there. She had been trying to do that for a long time, and she died before she was able to do that. But she was really, what was wonderful about her, if you look, she was such an inspiring leader. She was like the embodiment of leadership, and that's something that is very elusive and very difficult to find. But she was also a warm human being to her people. So that's why I really always wanted to do her. But I've learned also from doing my other books that it's great to see some of the daughters too, because Maria Theresa isn't well known here in the United States, but she's somewhat known. Her daughters these are the women who nobody has ever heard of. And the first daughter that I did, let's go to. So in this group, the first daughter I did was Maria Christina, who goes by her nickname of Mimi. I'm going to call her Mimi. Now, Maria Christina, you can see her here. If you go all the way to the side of the portrait, I'm sorry, I don't have, you can't like just point it out on this, but there's a man on the side. That's Francis of Lorraine. That's Maria Theresa's husband. And the girl next to him, the tall girl next to him, is his eldest daughter, Marianne. She was sickly, actually, and she ended up not getting married, and she went into the church. But the girl next to her, the kind of round-faced one, that's Mimi. And Mimi turns into this woman right here. Isn't she lovely? She was an artist. This is a self-portrait, not bad, right? And she was also Governor General of Hungary and later of Brussels and Flanders. And she ends up having to fight exactly the same revolutionary forces that Marie Antoinette has to. And they also target her for execution, but she handles it a little differently and she gets away. But it's not what we're going to talk to her about. I'm going to talk to her about what happened to her when she was 19. So when she was 19 years old, her elder brother, Joseph, let's go back and find Joseph. Okay, so Joseph is in the red coat in this picture, and he's the eldest son. He's Maria Theresa's eldest son, and he's the first son who's born in half a century, because remember, Maria Theresa's father didn't have any sons, and Maria Theresa had 3 girls before she had Joseph. She finally had Joseph, and she had him at a time when she really, really needed him to be there, to have a son. And so she always considered him a gift from God. And so she thought of him as a gift from God. She treated him as a gift from God. The other servants, all of his servants, treated him like he was a gift from God. And he grew up believing that he was a gift from God. And that is a recipe for disaster. Joseph grew up to be really a very obnoxious kind of a guy. He was arrogant. He was sarcastic. He had no compassion for other people. He didn't like being told he was wrong. He would whine and complain. But so the summer that when he's 20 years old, the summer that he's 20 years old, Maria Theresa decides it's time for him to get married, because he's going to be the person who inherits all of her lands and all of her subjects, and he needs to get started on a family so he can have a son to hand it down to. Because Maria Theresa, by the time she has all these children, the job has just so overwhelmed her. She doesn't want any of her daughters to have to rule. It killed me, but she never trained any of her daughters for rule because she didn't want them to have to do it. And so she wants Joseph to have a son so that so the line can go on forever in the male line. So Joseph has to get married, and it's the summer, and when he's 20, and he really doesn't want to get married. and he's dreading it, and he's grousing about it all summer, how he can't pretend to be a lover, and he's never going to love. He doesn't want to get married to a girl, and he doesn't love her, and it's going to ruin his freedom, and he doesn't think he should have, but he knows he's going to do it, but he's not happy about it. And so, but the woman that Maria Theresa has engaged him to is somebody called Isabella of Parma. And Isabella of Parma she's from Parma, which is in Italy. It's a diplomatic alliance as well as a wedding alliance, because Maria Theresa needs to have influence in Italy. And also Isabella of Parma is a granddaughter of the French king, Louis XV. So she also has ties to France. And this is a great diplomatic coup for Maria Theresa, for her son to marry this girl, Isabella of Parma. So Isabella of Parma comes in the fall of 1760, and she comes in this line of carriages, 200 carriages or something. It's one of those crowd paintings. It's in the book. And she gets out of the carriage, and Isabella of Parma is just really hot. She's 19 years old, and she's very hot stuff. She's pretty. She's very intelligent, very educated. She reads philosophy. She's a musician. She's charming. She's funny. She's witty. She's sexy. She's a whole package. Joseph takes one look at her and just falls helplessly in love with her. And he's gaga. And the whole family is just laughing. And so this is so great. Joseph, look at that. Joseph has actually fallen in love with his own wife. Maybe she'll mellow him out a little. It's just great. This is a wonderful thing. And it's true. Joseph fell in love, and Isabella fell in love too. Unfortunately, Isabella fell in love with Mimi, his sister Mimi. And you can't really make this stuff up. There are letters that Isabella wrote. She wrote to over 200 letters in 2 years to Mimi, and most of that time they were living in the same palace. She just couldn't control herself. She just really, really adored Mimi, and it was a whole lesbian relationship kind of going on there. And this whole situation, this triangle between Mimi and Isabella and Joseph, gets even more complicated when Mimi falls in love with her cousin Albert. And so now it's kind of like a square or a rectangle. And Albert is unfortunately, he's not even, he's not someone that Mimi is qualified to marry Mimi. He doesn't have any prospects. He doesn't have any income. He's a younger son. He'll never rule. And the way she maneuvered her, because women did not have power back, especially young unmarried women, daughters did not have power. And the way Mimi got what she wanted really was as big a victory as any general won on a battlefield. So that's one of the women that I wrote about. And this one is, the next one I wrote about was Maria Carolina, who will go by Charlotte. And you can see Maria Carolina in the background, all the way in the background. She's the little girl in the blue dress at the back. And here she is here with her family. Maria Carolina's story was that she was 15 years old. She was the second youngest daughter. She was very close to Marie Antoinette. And she has to, and there, through an odd set of circumstances, somebody had to go marry the King of Naples, and she is suddenly volunteered at the age of 15 to go marry the King of Naples. And she really doesn't want to do this. She was not ready. It came at her. They told her like 2 months before she had to go. Naples was very far away from Vienna. She'd never been out of Austria, and she on top of that, she has to go down and marry this guy. And I will tell you, I've written, I told you I've written all these other books about all different kinds of kings. I vote hands down the worst husband ever is this guy Ferdinand. There he is standing there in the red coat. He was a terrible monarch, and he was a terrible husband. He gave her venereal disease. He wouldn't pay any attention to his subjects or anything like that. And Maria and Charlotte, poor Charlotte, she gets down there. She's 15 years old. She gets to Naples in time to have a midnight wedding. And when it's right into the bedroom. I mean, and you should read it. People say, oh, women grew up matured earlier back then. They did not. You have to read her letters to see how she felt about this. But then Charlotte recovers. I mean, Charlotte becomes very, very strong. She becomes almost like Maria Theresa. She's the most like her of any of the daughters, because she will eventually, because her husband will not rule, she has to take over, and she takes over, and she does a great job. She also she was a big reader. I loved about that one thing about her. She was a great reader, and she really improved education in Naples, the Kingdom of Naples, which is basically the whole southern boot of Italy plus the island of Sicily. So that's all her subjects. Every time they had an earthquake or something, she'd be right there and helping the people. She improved the roads. She gave them a navy. She ushered that kingdom into its golden age. She read every paper that crossed her desk like her mother. She chaired the council. She made the decisions. She did it all she had 18 children in 20 years or something like that. A lot of them died from smallpox. Even the inoculations weren't working for some reason where she was. And, but she was a person who made a point of reading every day, and not just novels or anything like that. She read history, she read economics, she read philosophy. They had a great library in Naples, and she picked up a whole library and moved it to her quarters and organized the books herself. So she was really a terrific ruler. And again, but then she has to fight Napoleon, and Napoleon ends up being, Napoleon is one of the most feared warriors ever, and he targets her. So that's another great story in the book. And now after that, we come to, let's go back. Yes. And I just have to say, this is Charlotte's best friend. This is Lady Emma. Lady Emma Hamilton. I don't know if you ever saw that movie, That Hamilton Woman, but hers is a great story. And it's Admiral Nelson and Lord Hamilton and Emma is another triangle, but Emma and Charlotte work together. And because of them, Nelson was able to win the Battle of Egypt against Napoleon. So that's a whole, and this woman, this story is also just fabulous in the book. They just keep making the same miniseries about the same people. Make one about her. She had a really fascinating life. She came from nothing and she becomes an ambassadress. And what happened in the middle was really entertaining also. So that's Lady Emma Hamilton. Let's go. And so now finally we come to the last daughter, Maria, that I wrote about, which was Marie Antoinette. This is Marie Antoinette. I think she's pretty famous. This is the Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun portrait of her. And Marie Antoinette has actually been in the news quite a bit recently because of her, there were letters that she wrote to this guy right here. This is Count Axel Fersen, who is rumored to be her lover, that have recently been deciphered to contain words that like love and adore and madly and all that stuff, which would indicate that they were lovers. And in my book, this is not a gray area. This was an affair. But Marie Antoinette is, this is her husband, Louis XVI. And I have to tell you that when I started writing this book, I never expected to find anything new about Marie Antoinette. I put Marie Antoinette in the book because how can you do a book about Maria Theresa and her daughters without doing Marie Antoinette, who's the most famous of them? And I figured her story's been told so many times. But really what happens is her story is told so many times, but the people who tell it just look at Marie Antoinette's life. And I come at it from the entire all those other French courts from the 13th century on. And I always look at the husband. And you have only to look at Louis' story, just start beginning to investigate it, and it becomes very clear that that Louis was a very different king than any other king that came before. He is like no one else. He cannot make from a very young age, he doesn't make eye contact. He shies away from other people. He has odd physical mannerisms. He cannot hold a conversation, or very difficult to even start a conversation, and he can't hold one. He must hold to a very strict routine. He's very highly intelligent, but it is a very directed intelligence into like clockworks and carpentry. He has every classic symptom of autism spectrum disorder. And it is this that explains so much about what happened at that court, because even though I didn't expect to find anything new, I always had questions about why Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI did not get away when they escaped. Why did every other member of the royal family get away? How did so many of the aristocrats get away, but they could not get away? And this explains, him being on the spectrum explains so much about everything that happens in their lives. And it's one of the reasons why there's a lot of outcry that I said that Marie Antoinette, that she had this affair with Fersen, but it makes a lot of sense when you realize that she really did not love her. She was not in love with Louis XVI. She knew her job and she knew to protect him. And after a while, she had feelings for him because they were in so much trouble together and they were trying to get through it. But she was not romantically in love with him. And that's not just me saying it. Her lady in waiting says it. Her brother says it. And it's not that she was promiscuous. She wasn't promiscuous, but she did fall in love with this man, and he fell in love with her. And it's almost overwhelming that her second son, which was the child who later will die in the tower, was Fersen's and not Louis XVI. I've gotten a lot of flack from this from many of the people who are fans of Marie Antoinette, who have heard the story so often that they believe it just the way it is. But that's a mythology. That's not what's going on in this court. This court has a power, an absence of power at the top, because Louis cannot make a decision. He doesn't make a decision. He needs to have his counsel tell him. Everything has to be written down for Louis. So he can read it and he can understand it, but he cannot confront anyone. He never confronts anyone. And he cannot show that, that leadership that Maria Theresa showed, being able to inspire people, being able to talk to people, being able to talk to a crowd, Louis can do none of that. He cannot, he is silent. It's almost like he's not there. And so that's really what was happening more at this court. And it's very fascinating for how the whole revolution plays out. So I think I've gone on for pretty much. I wonder if we have any questions maybe, or if you want to write down there some questions, and we can go from there and see what we want to say.
Sure. Yeah, it looks like we're getting some questions here. So don't forget Q&A. There's a couple that are in here. So we'll start with the first one. It sounds like there's a person that's interested in your research. They ask, where do you get so much intimate information from? How are you seeing and discovering the details and knowledge that the average person can't get to?
That's a great question. They are because of the internet, and the scholarship in history has just exploded. This is like one of the best times ever to be an historian, because they've scanned, it used to be you would have to go to a library and read something during the hours from 9 to 5, and you'd have to go if that library happened to be in Vienna, you had to go there, or if you had to go to a library in France, you had to go there. And but because nobody really wants every scholar picking up old pieces of paper and touching them and looking at them, because that's just going to destroy them over time. They've scanned all this stuff. So you can get it online if you're part of an academic institution, or if you have access to this kind of thing. And these people wrote letters, and ambassadors' reports, everything you can get online, and you can get it just when you need it. Like if you have a question, you can say, I wonder what was happening. I wonder what Count Mercy thought about this, or I wonder what this person thought about this. You can go locate that letter and have your question answered just then. And in my book, there's many letters that Maria, let's go back to. I really wanted to bring Maria, Christina, Mimi, and Charlotte's back to you into the world, because like Mimi's has many letters, and these are going to appear in my book for the first time ever in English. I read them all, I translated them, and they show how involved she was in imperial foreign policy, everything that happened to her, how she feels about her husband, how she feels about her adopted son, how she feels about her brother. Everything's all in there. And you never would have had that before. And that's why we're able to put together books like this today, where 15 years ago, you would have had to go from one library to another, to another, to another. And that's why to be an historian now is just the best. It's a great time. So.
Yeah, the internet's great for that. People say there's a lot of bad things on the internet, but scholarship, that's one of the good things. So what's the significance of the title of your book, The Shadow of the Empress, and how did you come up with that?
Well, it was because Maria Theresa cast a huge shadow over Europe. When she died, everything started to fall up. That's when everything started. She really held it together by fighting Frederick the Great. She kept him in line. She had a much more moral vision of because she was attacked when she started out. She never wanted to attack other people. She wanted to just keep what she had, protect it, and hold on to it. And she was a force for morality, civility, moderation. She didn't do things by fiat. She convinced people. She would negotiate and talk until she got it done. When she died, that went away, and you can see how it gets more and more extreme after she dies. And also her daughters carry on this legacy. Charlotte tried to carry on that legacy. Mimi should have been the one running the empire after Maria Theresa died. It would have kept things more stable. But Joseph, because he was the eldest son, he got it, and he was a very liberal guy. He had very good intentions, but he tried to change too much, too fast, and all he ended up was everybody rebelling against him. So that's what In the Shadow of the Empress means. What happens with her, what the shadow she cast over Europe, and how her daughters carried on.
Okay. We have a question about Maria Theresa. Did she have any military education, or did she rely on the brilliant men to counsel her during times of war?
Let's go back to her. That's a great question. Not only did she not have any military experience, she had some of the worst commanders you can possibly imagine. I do not know how she really did it just through perseverance. But what happened was she fought back, she actually surprised the other side. And by fighting back, she got England to help her with money. But the way that she really got her soldiers and was able to get an army back together was to go to Hungary. She had to go to Hungary, which was usually a rebellious province, kingdom. And she had to go through this whole coronation. She was so respectful to them. And she went through this whole coronation ceremony with them. At one point, she has to ride a horse up a hill and take a sword and go in 4 directions and promise to protect them. And they were so charmed with her, and that they granted her all these soldiers and everything. And so she got the soldiers and she got the money. but she was hampered by the fact that she had her husband, Francis of Lorraine, tried to be head of the army, and he was terrible. And then she gave it to his brother, Charles, and Charles was okay for a while, and then Charles was no good. But she just kept throwing the money and throwing the soldiers and improving the colonels underneath. So she was able to survive that way. If she'd had any kind of a decent commander, she could have taken over Germany. I mean, she had it, but her brother-in-law, Charles, I mean, she couldn't say no to him. He really wanted to do it. But at one point he goes out and it surveys the battlefield, and he sees how many people the enemy has, and he just passes right out on the field, and he has to be carried off in a litter. How do you think that looks to the rest of the army? Like, that's not a really great way to start the battle. So of course they're not going to win that one. But she just kept making them try it, and eventually she succeeded.
Okay, we have a question about maybe your newest endeavor in researching or publishing. Is there anything you're interested in writing about next?
I am. I'm in the middle. I'm just starting now about the 19th century, right? I wanted to do the 19th century, and I wanted to see, how all this played out, because you leave with this book, In the Shadow of the Empress. This one leaves off with Napoleon. Napoleon has just been defeated. But then, I never really, in the 19th century, it's very complicated. So I wanted to find a way to tell the story of the 19th century. And the way you do that, I'm going to do Empress Elizabeth, who is, her name is Sissy. She's a very famous, unfortunately, she's another one of these famous ones. But I'm doing her with Eugenie of France, who was Napoleon III's wife. She was also, so two empresses, and they're kind of rebels. And so we're going to see the whole century play out that way. But I'm just in the very beginning. That's years away from. It takes me 4 years to write a book. It's just a long time. You have to do all the research, you have to do all the translation, you have to find everything that you want to say. So that's what I was going to do there.
Okay, we have a question about a queen, actually. There's a patron that asks, have you ever considered writing a book about Queen Christina of Sweden?
Queen Christina of Sweden is covered a little bit in my earlier book, Daughters of the Winter Queen. She deserves a really good biography right now. Somebody should do that, but I already did that century. So I didn't, but she comes in, it's fun to read about her because she brings Descartes to Sweden, and it's a little too cold for him, and poor guy dies there. So, that's part of you can see her kind of there in that part in that book.
Okay, we have a question about Maria Theresa, her remaining children. Doesn't exactly say who, but I assume that the person means the ones later on she had in life. What happened to them? What's their story?
They're all in there. They're all in the book. So if you go back, so Marianne is the one next to Mimi. What happens to you when you are unmarried in the 18th century is you go into the convent. Even whether you want to or not. And we know Mimi, but then there are there's another son, Leopold, and Leopold actually breaks the curse. He's going to be an emperor after Joseph. He breaks the curse of not having sons. He has 10 sons. They have too many sons, don't know what to do with them all. But he will take over after Joseph. And he is actually, Mimi and Leopold are very close. He's very enlightened. He was the Grand Duke of Tuscany for most of which is like Florence. So for most of his life, that's what he is. And towards the end, he has to deal also with Marie Antoinette and the French Revolution. All these people are trying to get her out. They just don't know how to do it the best way. And Fersen is actually the one who comes up with the way to try and help them escape. And then they have to have a war over it. And so Leopold has to deal with that. And then Leopold's son will go on and be emperor after him, one of his sons. And then there's Maria Elizabeth. She's like the next daughter in line. And, smallpox the plague of smallpox was just terrible, and you either died from it or you could be disfigured from it. And poor Maria Elizabeth was the beauty of the family. She gets smallpox. She has three suitors going after her, and they're all kings. She could have been the queen of something important. She gets smallpox. She gets disfigured. That's it, into the nunnery. So, and that they live a long time, and she wasn't ready for it. She's, that's another side of how women are. When I say Mimi negotiated her way out of it, boy, that was a really hard thing to do. Isabella of Parma said she actually did that kind of like a philosophy about it. She said, what can the daughter of a great prince expect? And she says, you have to obey on the outside and wait your time when you will have some. You will not always be powerless. And the day you are not powerless, then you have to act. But Maria Elizabeth never had that chance because she was disfigured. And so I really picked, and then there's Maria Amalia, who gets to be Duchess of Parma. She actually also rules, but Parma is such a non-entity, is not an important duchy, so she wasn't important enough. But she's also was a very strong woman. Maria Theresa didn't raise any cowards, believe me. They were all really strong, brave women.
Okay. We have a question here about Maria Theresa and a comment too. It says, I can't imagine having 16 children. How were the child practices different in that era and the child rearing ideas? What were they like?
I know, right? So I had to do the book. I had to divide. There were so many children. I had to divide them in groups: the elder group, the younger group. So because by the elder group, she paid more attention to, obviously, when they were growing up. But by the time you get to 13, 14, 15, you tend to let things slide. So what she had was Maria Theresa. She had an army kind of governesses or teachers to raise the children, but she gave all of the instructions, and she made sure that she had to see all the children's work. That was a problem when it came to Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette she was young and she was adorable, and but she didn't like to do her homework. I think she had trouble actually. She really had trouble reading. She might have been dyslexic or something, because she was a perfectly intelligent person, but she just had trouble reading. And her governess she would actually write her papers for her in pencil and have Marie Antoinette trace over it in pen. And then they'd show those papers to Maria Theresa to show that Marie Antoinette was learning. And then when Marie Antoinette had to suddenly was going to go to France, that governess, they gave her to a different governess, and it was discovered that she couldn't write or read French very well. She couldn't speak it very well. So they had to give her this intensive 6 months course, which didn't do that much, but it did teach her to curtsy and dance and speak French a little better. But basically, Maria Theresa expected her children to act the way her soldiers did. She would say, I want my children to do this. I want them to eat this. I want them to learn this. And the governesses and the tutors would do that for her.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and I saved the best for last, if you will. Frederick the Great of Prussia, you mentioned him quite a lot. Why was that Austria's greatest adversary during the reign of Maria Theresa?
Well, that was really interesting, because I will say that the war where she first comes to her reign and everybody attacks her at the same time is called the War of the Austrian Succession. And that is really the only war in history that I can think of, which wasn't for power or economics or anything like that. It was just because a woman wasn't supposed to be queen, wasn't supposed to rule, and a gay man wasn't supposed to be a king, because Frederick the Great was born gay, very clearly born gay, and his father tried to beat it out of him. It's a terrible story. You can only feel sorry for him. And because of that, it changed him. Frederick was a person who loved bright colors. He loved music. He loved literature. He wanted to be a writer. He wanted to be a poet. He wanted to be all those kind of things. And his father just it was really child abuse, and psychological child abuse as well as physical child, not sexual, but psychological and physical child abuse. And so Frederick ended up wanting to prove to his parent, even after his father died, he wanted to prove that he could be a better soldier and a better king and a stronger guy than his father could ever have been. And that's why he started right away. And he, unlike Maria Theresa's father, who left her no soldiers and no money, Frederick the Great's father left him a big army and lots of money. And he used it right away to try to take property. And he does succeed in taking away Silesia, which killed her for her whole life. She tried to get it back her whole time. He does keep some property, but the rest of the other powers lose it to her. But so this is why he becomes her nemesis. He pretended to be her friend, and then he keeps double crossing, and she thinks he's amoral. He's completely amoral, and she's fighting him, and he's right on her doorstep. So if she doesn't put him in his place, he is eventually going to take over her kingdom. And so he's the one, he was the best general. He turned himself into, I will say, he didn't start out not being so great, but he turned himself into a great general and a great soldier. And in fact, Napoleon learns from Frederick the Great. Napoleon's trying to be Frederick the Great and does it a little bit better even than he did. So that's why Frederick the Great is the person that she is really afraid of the whole time.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank everyone. I hope someday we will all meet each other in person again.
Let's hope so. Yeah. Well, thank you very much again. And thanks for everybody out there. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.